One of the upsides for the great downside of all of this for creative people, and no matter your genre, is that disruption and chaos is sometimes the fuel for super creativity.
Welcome to our latest free online event. We're delighted you're all joining us here today for this Lunch with a Commissioner session with Nina Hahn, Senior Vice President, International Production and Development, Nickelodeon. The chair of the session is co-founder of animation studio Blue Zoo, Oli Hyatt. Thanks, Oli.
Hi, everyone. Today we have got Nina Hahn, who I have known for about 15 years, I think, since she started at Nickelodeon in the UK, and we are super lucky to have her. She's one of my favorite commissioners. You have to say about every commissioner. One of my favorite commissioners, but also she's one of the easiest commissioners to get a meeting with. So when you're out at the markets around MIP or any of the other markets around the world, she's super easy to get a meeting with because you can always see her because of her fabulous hair. You know exactly where she is, and you can see her around.
Thank you. I'll never go bald, I promise.
Yeah, that's my responsibility.
Exactly.
Nina, I thought we'd just start. If you could just give us a little bit of a roundup of your current role within Nickelodeon and a bit of your journey of maybe of how you got to there.
Yes. Okay. So this is probably the boring part, so I'll speed through this quite quickly. As Ali mentioned, so I look after all of the longer form content made outside of the US. We have a lot of content made inside the US out of our groups in LA and New York, as many of you might know. But there's 177 channels around the world for Nickelodeon. It's the biggest kids network in the world. And so a lot of that content gets made outside of the US as well. So that's what myself and my great team look after. And we cut across live action, animation, preschool, and TV movies. So we do a lot of different aspects of kid content creation, but definitely all, whether you're US or you're international, abide by the same sort of operating principle of making something once and using it everywhere, such that you're flying the Nickelodeon flag versus the Nick UK flag or the Nick German flag, and so on and so forth. So I get to have the best job ever. And on parent teacher night, when you go with your young kids and you've got the nurses and the doctors and all these people, which are quite important before you, I get to come in with the fun finger painting job at the end, which is basically what I do.
Yeah, I think that it chimes well with me as well. That, you know, our job is the best job in the world. When people ask me what I do for a living, I would say I run an animation business. My brother would say I do colouring in for a living. So,
exactly.
But he's an accountant, so
exactly.
what can we do?
Exactly.
I thought we'd move on to, we're obviously in a very particular phase of our existence on this planet. It's a very strange times. And I just thought I'd ask you the question early on is how are the Nickelodeon teams coping? How is it changing business? How, you know, what was your strategy for getting through this content wise, really?
So, you know, I mean, obviously, I think Ali and I were just talking about this beforehand. One of the upsides for the great downside of all of this for creative people, and no matter your genre, is that disruption and chaos is sometimes the fuel for super creativity. And I think this situation has been no different for a lot of the people with whom we work, whether it's the Blue Zoos of the world, whether it's independent writers, creators, producers, and so on, domestically, globally. There's been this sense of, you know, all bets are off, and if you can find a way to make something, if you can find a way to get something up on screen and keep the content ticking over, go for it. And so that's been a fantastic call to duty for Nick specifically. We're working on every single continent. In the case of live action, obviously, this has been the biggest challenge because all of our shows, like so many others, had to be shut down. Ironically, one of the series that we are working on, 50% of the cast is over 70, which was a dedicated idea for us to try and create content on air that showed both young kids but also older people, which was great thought at the time, pre-pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, it was a little more difficult. So we had to shut that down, but we are now looking at opening that up pretty soon. So even those green shoots are coming back. And in animation, it's just been the poster child for success for so many people, including Nick. I mean, one, all your characters travel by Federal Express, so that's very easy, and don't have to worry about the pandemic on the plane for your characters. But two, the Blue Zoos of the world and many other producers of the world that we work with in India and Israel, and all across Europe, have found a way to work fluidly through this whole thing by creating the at-home work experience, by figuring out new ways to deal with dubbing, by figuring out new ways to deal with casting and voiceovers and all the things that are involved in getting a piece of animated content on the air. And it's been magnificent to see. I would give Blue Zoo actually the A star for their pivot. They were in incredible fighting shape to be able to toggle. And to that end, none of our shows are experiencing delays, and all the animators are kept working, all the producers are kept alive, and it just feels really great to have a loop that's working so healthy.
I think in many ways, people suddenly really, when the chips are down, people realize, we've got to do something differently, or we've got to work smarter or communicate better. And I actually think one of the lessons we can take out of the pandemic is we've become much more efficient in how we communicate with deadlines, and maybe thinking about working differently, which again is like as a creative thing and a structural organizational thing, that they're both sort of. We've obviously all changed our habits during the lockdown. Have you noticed any change in viewer habits in terms of when or what they're watching?
I think obviously more kids are watching more stuff everywhere you go, and I think that's it's an exciting uptick for linear television, which has had its challenges as the years are progressing, but it's an exciting notion that, we've got an audience that is now more than ever interested in watching things that we give them, and interested in watching things that we give them in lots of different flavors. So obviously high production values is really important to us. At the same time, low production values is also working. So again, I think it's this notion of being everywhere kids are, which is what Nickelodeon's operating principle really is, and being authentic in that representation is something that we've remained very true to during these times.
And do you think, like, once we're out of the sort of COVID phase and out of lockdown, do you see that the TV landscape will be like permanently changed, or is this just, do you think, like a phase we're going through now? Do you think people will return to linear because they've got used to it, or do you think it will gradually just slip back into the old ways?
Well, I mean, I really hope that the change, not just even the experience of watching on linear, but I really hope that the injection of creative risk-taking, which we've seen in so many different genres, kids being one of them, but also in the adult genres as well, that there's this sense that it doesn't have to be also by the book, and that we can actually change the way we make things, change the way we talk about things, change what we talk about and how we talk about it, no matter what the platform, and I think create a new way of relating to content. And I think that this has just been a sort of a supercharge to be able to do that going forward. So I have every hope that this will Velcro us to the future.
Absolutely. And in terms of like the future, in the short term, I know a lot of commissioners, someone's asked the question, a lot of the commissioners have kind of put themselves on hold during the pandemic because they don't know where things are going, or they've spent a lot of money. The BBC spent a lot of immediate money on the education side of things, and they're kind of indicating, well, there won't be any money, any commissions until the following year, and even then they might have to put the funding back into the things that have got delayed. Are you experiencing similar things, that you're taking like a longer view, or are things still getting commissioned now and still moving forwards?
Things are definitely still getting commissioned now. I mean, what's weird is I feel like we've commissioned more in this period of time than ever before. And a lot of that has to do with being quite innovative with how we commission. So there does demand a partnership of flexibility between who you're working with, or where you're working, or how you're working. But we're about to announce a live action pickup in Australia, for example, because Australia is so ahead of the game with their production capabilities, given their effective dealing with the pandemic, that we thought to ourselves, well, actually that's where we should go look to get started in live action again, because it's the first up and running. So that's going to go, as well as a lot of other things that we've worked across in terms of season 2s, and just in many cases even done orders whereby we order a lot of scripts, so we can keep the script writing going, so that when things settle down again, we're ready to go right into production. So it's been very fruitful for us.
For people wanting, I'm going to take it down two routes because we've had one question, but first of all, if people want to get their ideas in front of you, if you could just talk a little bit, I know you're focused on one thing, but if you could talk about possibly the two routes, so a more local, it's a UK facing conference. So there's two different routes in there. There's the kind of slightly more UK route, and then there's the more global. Can you tell us what the difference is and how you would maneuver between the two, or is there no difference?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll define it sort of even slightly differently than I think, you know, this notion that I'd said earlier of the gold medal is to make something once and to use it everywhere. And to do that is quite difficult because to Ollie's point, sometimes you're looking at making something very local, but you need it to be global. And sometimes you're looking at something very global, but you need it to have a real local relevance. You know, one of the shows that we are working on with Ollie now called It's Pony is a great example of a show that will feel like it's UK in terms of everybody who's around it and making it, but equally it will feel very global because it does feel very global because it has, you know, been built to appeal to everyone. So there are a number of ways to work with us, but remember that the best way is to think of a project that has a global feel, if you will. And so, you know, by and large, although Nick International rents space in the Nick UK offices, which is one of the 177 channels, we are responsible for finding content that will appeal to everyone. So if you come in with an idea, it's more about figuring out, is this a Nick show versus a Cartoon Network show or Disney show or Netflix show or whatever else? And if it is, for example, where in the day part would I put it if I was a programmer for a day at Nickelodeon? Those two things will steer you in the direction of making something relevant for the brand and really trying to understand why Nick, which is a big question we ask whenever we get a pitch. In terms of the ways to come in, you can come in, I don't know if we'll show the slide, there's we have an email where you can send any of your pitches to us and they get reviewed. We can put it up later or that'll come up so you can see that. But in addition to that, we work across lots of different deal arrangements as well, whether it's a wholly owned project or it's something that we put through our acquisitions lane. So there's a lot of different, it's a revolving door of places to come in and out and ways to go.
And in terms of a Nick show, like I hope I would know the answer by now, but in terms of what is the core to what your audience are enjoying and what you want to put in front of them? What are the absolute core values that Nickelodeon is trying to express?
So I think the easiest way to say it, although it is not really professional, I suppose, is equal parts heart, fart, smart. That's the sort of keystones of the content that we make. And there's a few other things that are part of that don't rhyme, so we can't put it in there. Obviously, the heart part is you have to care about the characters. You have to care about the show. They have to be meaningful to you at home. You want to jump out of your couch and go live in their life with them. And it's hard to do, but that is what the emotional piece means. The fart part is the comedy. Obviously, Nickelodeon and kids around the world are really co-connected by laughter and fun and funny. So, you know, it's got to be a broadly appealing piece of content that we feel like kids in India could laugh at, kids in Brazil could laugh at, kids in the US could laugh at. And the smart is that we don't talk down to kids. And this is quite a difference than some of the other networks that you'll find in terms of how they define this. But for us, it's really trying to be your world, only a little bit better. Whereas when you look at, for example, a Disney, magic is a big part of their USB, you know, and they've done a fantastic job at it. But it starts from a very torqued up magical place very often and goes even further than that. Whereas Nick always starts from a very grounded, realistic, relevant spot, and then takes you on a journey to things that are just a bit better than what you might have in your everyday. And that's deliberately done that way. In addition to that, gender neutral is a big part of our USB. Diversity is an even bigger part of our USB, which is obviously the diversity and inclusion things that are happening now are great and so important, but the brand has always been about that since forever, since it started. And part of that is in the reflecting the world in which a kid lives in is what makes the channel so relevant to kids. And we do that with a ton of research and a ton of consumer insights, you know, all the time. So we're able to toggle to create a world that is reflective of a kid's universe.
I think it's worth putting up at this point. If we've got the slide with the values, so there's this, what do you call them, Nina? You call them the
It's a Nickelodeon Kids Bill of Rights. And what was so interesting about this was created in June 1990. So a very, very long time ago. And obviously, when you read through this, so many years ago that it was written, these are still principles today that we want every kid to live by. We want every human being to live by, to be honest, but every kid to live by. And this declaration of this Bill of Rights was something that we had internally and used internally all the time, but we are now using it here. And I think we've put it on our air as a scroll during Blackout Tuesday. And it has been a very, very supported global message that we're reminding all kids of the world that these are your rights. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. And as I said, this is something that we've abided by forever and will continue now to push as we go. And I don't know if anybody has read recently, even we just announced yesterday that we're going to bring back Nick News, a Nick News special hosted by Alicia Keys, all about diversity and inclusion and a lot of what's happening in the world today for kids. So it's a big part of what makes us, that authenticity is really important for us to talk about right now with kids.
Yeah, I mean that's such. When I saw this, I saw someone post this exact thing on Facebook, and I thought, isn't that brilliant? And I didn't realize at the time it was from years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
Which to me, I was like, wow, that's amazing. It felt forward thinking, but also at the same time, it made me feel like slightly depressed that, gosh, we haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
As adults, I think children have got there, are getting there quicker than adults, to be honest.
Yes, that's true.
We talked about Pony earlier. Pony fits exactly along the lines of what you said. Our world, but a little bit more, a little bit pushed. And again, it's about the character and the relationship. So I think it's an interesting comparison between what public broadcasters have done during COVID and what you guys have done. So obviously the BBC have gone heavily down the educational route and got all the lesson plans. What you introduce things in a much more softer way. I don't know if you could talk a little bit around that. How you mentioned that there's a hospital in that, and it engages children with hospitals, but there's other bits and bobs you've been doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken a pretty strong position on it, both on air and off air, and I think use the principle of heart, fart, smart across everything that we do, not only obviously in the content that we make, but also in the promotional work that we do. And we've produced a series of promos that again take a serious issue of hygiene and washing our hands and some of the messaging that's so important to keep kids safe during this time. But again, put it through a kid lens that we hope makes it more memorable, but we certainly hope makes it funny and fun for them as they're also learning how to self-protect. I should mention that hashtag Kids Together was a really interesting, very customized approach by Nick. So Viacom CBS took the path when the pandemic started of hashtag Alone Together, and it was going to be used company-wide, and it was used company-wide with the exception of Nickelodeon, because we all felt that the concerning messaging that would send to a kid of alone together, really the emphasis on alone felt just didn't feel appropriate for young kids who might be frightened or might not want to feel alone during all this. We might want it to feel much more together as a team. And so we changed the hashtag specifically for the Nick brand to be Kids Together, and obviously went forward with a much more inclusive you're all together safety message than we did just with each singular person stay safe.
We've got a question on the group chat, which is around, you've been doing stuff that work, for the COVID, that's a particular example, but have you got any plans to sort of build into your programming, messaging around building a better world? I know that kind of sits better with the public service broadcasters, but do you include those values in your shows?
For sure. I mean, I think that, again, though, we do it in a what's the Nickelodeon version of, and that's a question we ask internally all the time. You certainly see that messaging very directly in a lot of our preschool shows, for sure. That messaging is of a better world, of, being kind to one another, and all of the social emotional lessons and learnings, as well as some of the curriculum aspects that dovetail with that are in our shows for the preschool space, and quite, demonstratively so. On the Big Nick side, again, I would say we have I suppose, the BBC would have a more hard approach to that, or a dead-on approach, whereas we come at it from a right angle, if you will. And, the concept of your world only better is a way in which we would encapsulate what it's like to live in a lovely way together with all your friends. And, you know, SpongeBob is such an amazing example of that. And Pony is too. And there's a lot of themes in all of those shows. Loud House is another one because it has a family USB of what it is to live with 11 brothers and sisters. So although we don't stand on a box and preach it, it's baked in and integrated into all the stories that we do of what it means, you know, to have certain themes and messages that are, you know, positive and hopeful and actually, you know, just nice and kind.
What I enjoy as well is, like, I think a lot of the relationships of the characters on Nickelodeon, be it the live action or the animation, is they're slightly more, while they're funny, they're realistic relationships. Like,
Yeah.
they're not all sweet and kind and bouncy, and, you know, that, but there's realistic reflections of what a family is and the pressures of a family, and
Yeah.
and I think that's, you know, a really nice way of presenting a sort of
They're
realistic.
very authentic. And I think one of the reasons that is so is because of the way almost every single Nickelodeon show is built, which is there's a central character at the center who's, well, I'm not gonna say boring, but it's the most normal one of the group. It's you or me at home as a kid. It's somebody we could identify with. That's me. I know that person. And that's your tour guide through the episode. You go into the show with attached to that character, and then you're introduced to the crazy characters that are all, you know, different shapes, colors, sizes, and voices around, flanking your main central anchor. And that's what allows you to really go to your world, only then see all this other world that you would probably not go to if you didn't have the safety of your tour guide.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the magic, because it's so hard to get those normal characters right, because you can easily go boring,
Correct.
or they just become another sort of caricature of something. And
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's.
Well, SpongeBob's a really good example of that then, because, you know, he's every man, every boy, every man boy. He's, you know, he's one normal guy in that whole crazy group.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, and yet, yeah.
He's nuts.
Nuts. Visually nuts for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we've got quite a few more questions coming up about pitching ideas. You've covered a bit of that off, but I just wondered, in terms of a time scale or a process. So an idea lands through the email or lands through a shorts program. Who are the contact points along the way before it may even get to you, or how long does that take? You know, just if you've got a bit more information about how it's judged, who reads it, what systems it moves through.
Right. I definitely could talk about that, but I will start by saying that whole process starts even before it gets to us. That whole process starts with you guys or anybody who has an idea that's trying to pitch, doing your homework. And that homework really is, as I said earlier, understanding why it's a Nickelodeon show and what is our brand and why it's a show that could only go on Nick. If you're finding it's a concept that can go on Nick or BBC or cartoon or whatever, then I think you have to go back to the drawing board and really task yourself with that first hoop to jump through. And the second hoop, as I said, is ask yourself, if I had to put it on the Nick Air right now today, tonally, where would I put it? Is it have a SpongeBob lead in and a Loud House lead out? Is it, where does it sit? And then very often you'll find, as we would do, it either has a fit and you can watch a great viewing experience like this because they're tonally about the same, or you're watching SpongeBob and then you have your show idea which goes down because it doesn't really match the energy or the vibe or the visuals of what you've got up there. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is make sure you know very clearly who your demo is of the idea. Because what preschool means to you, what preschool means to me, what 6 to 12, what 5 to 7, all those things mean can be different to different people. So it's really important that you know what we were all 4 years old at one point, that I know, but it's the 4-year-old of today is very different than the 4-year-old of, I'm not sure all of us, but many of us on this call. So do your research. I always ask people, like, when was the last time, it's really relevant now during the pandemic, but when was the last time, you sat in the back of a kid's classroom, of 6-year-olds and just audited the classroom to hear what they were and how they were. And all of that's really important to your idea, because when you submit it, if it feels like it's on point and has addressed a lot of these questions, it's going to go through the process a lot faster than if it gets in and it's just, it's an educational show about STEM for 12-year-old kids. It's just, not who we are and nothing that we do.
And do different shows play out at different ages across the world? I mean, looking from a global perspective, would something for 6-year-olds here be the same as
I think,
6-year-old in the
I
US?
mean, sometimes yes, but I think the shifts are quite small and the ranges are quite big. So it's really, you're splitting hairs. If you're saying a show is for a sweet spot of a 9, 10-year-old, you know, it may skew a little bit younger in the States and a little bit older in Europe, but by and large, things tend to work. I think the only place that is a little more difficult is in preschool, because Europe has a younger preschool history than the States does. So sometimes we get into issues where something that's really lovely and soft and wonderful would work ex-US, but not work so well in the States.
Okay, and I've got a question that's come in about co-viewing. Now, I always think, especially on the main channel, like co-viewing with your stuff is great. I mean, I just sit and laugh at Nickelodeon stuff all the time. But someone's asked the question of shows like Crystal Maze and America's Most Musical Family. Have you got plans to do more of those? I know they'd sort of come from the US. Have you got plans to do more of that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. And those, first of all, co-viewing is a good answer to your question from before, which is one of the trends that we've seen change in the COVID world, which is a big uptick in co-viewing, largely because we're all stuck at home, you know, with our kids or all stuck at home. So therefore, let's all watch together, which is what's really happened. And some of those unscripted efforts came about both before COVID, but also, you know, in an idea of how we could keep things energized and fresh and made very quickly whilst COVID was going on. So the answer is yes and yes. And the bigger answer is those are great ideas. They're great shows. They fit the brand. And so we make them.
And the shows that you have that have had like long-term success, have like lived on and on and on. So the great shows like SpongeBob. How do you make sure the content you produce remains sort of culturally relevant and relevant for children? As you know, Evergreen. Everyone wants the Evergreen show, right? So
Yeah.
is there a formula for doing that, or is it just down to the characters?
Well, I mean, I think if we had the secret sauce for evergreen shows, we would all be making them and be very rich and not have to ever make anything else. And I think that's both the blessing and the curse, you know, that your strength is your weakness and your weakness is your strength kind of thing. I think some of these shows that are now evergreens, whether it's Dora or SpongeBob and hopefully it's Pony, they have a certain, you know, the French say je ne sais quoi. They have something about them. Then just lightning strikes, they come together and they work. They all have a creator at the center, but many shows have a creator at the center, so that isn't it necessarily. They all have a very strong, heartfelt story to tell, which you care about, and you want to watch what happens to the character, which many things have about it. They all have a very interesting visual style, but again, many have visual. So I don't think we necessarily know what is the one thing that makes something an evergreen, because so much of it is out of our control. We control the content, the storytelling, the storyboarding, the design, and so on and so forth, but we don't control what's happening in the universe at that time and space. So we don't control necessarily what kids want to see, or if they want to see something really simple, or they want to see something really complex or highly produced, or what's happening with our competitors. You know, none of that we can control. So there's a lot of work and there's a lot of luck.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think sometimes you're surprised by what captures like the public mood at any one time.
Exactly.
And I think once you've captured that, that's when you can just keep going. As long as you keep making good stuff, you can just keep going.
Correct.
A question we've come in, because it always changes all the time. Maybe not so much with you guys, but what length of show are you looking for? As in, you know, TV half hours, or what does that mean for you? 5 minutes?
So the first answer is concentrate on making a great idea, and don't worry about the length of the episode. Just make a great, if you have a great idea and a great story, come with that. That's the first piece. But obviously what the trend for animation historically has been is 11-minute, what we call carts. So those feel like a good place to start if that's where you want to sit. We also have told half-hour stories for preschool in the animation space. We obviously do half hours for live action more readily than we do 11 minutes. But again, you know, I'm lying at the same time, because we've done other things that are 11 minutes and we've done some that are 7s, and I think we'd like to do a lot more that are 7s, and play around a bit with what, you know, how you can break a story up and what you can do to tell it. So I think we're quite open. What we've done is what we've done, but that doesn't mean what we're always going to do.
Yeah, I would really agree with that as well. So I know for some of the new shows that we're developing at Blue Zoo, the writers always ask us, oh, what length show is it? And I'm like, just write something really funny. And then
Yeah,
if it's 15 pages or 20 pages or 5 pages, it's still funny, and you can
yeah,
build out of that for
yeah.
pilot scripts and for examples. So yeah, I think just to start off with sort of, to pitch an idea, just make sure it's funny. Do you do animatics? That's an interesting question. I suspect that might be, would you expect to see an animatic when someone's pitching to you, or at what point?
So we do, this is really to support all of you who are creators. There is no one size fits all, and it's deliberately done that way because the way you want to tell a story is the way you want to tell a story, or I should say the way you want to show a story is the way you want to show a story. So the Shorts program was created just to change the game from writing a script and writing a Bible, when really you were artists and animators who wanted to show your story. And so we thought, let's create a short that you can show what you're trying to tell versus tell what you're trying to show. And that's how the shorts came. And in that process, there are animatics and all sorts of stages alongside of that. Part of the other piece that makes Nickelodeon work so well and be a partner to a creator versus a boss is we really want to have an early intervention, if you will, and work with you from minute one on whatever it is you're working on, both for us to be able to say we're already doing a show about a dachshund dog, or we're already doing a show about a fairy, so that don't worry about us for that one, or to say, to be the Swiss cheese with you, and where you have the holes, we can fill them with you and do it in conjunction with what the brand will want and need and the story that you're trying to tell. So talking to us early is important, and some of that may say, okay, let's do an animatic, or let's do a script, or let's just go straight to a short, or we're going to pick the whole thing up, or, and anything can happen.
I think that's really important advice, because I know certainly from our perspective of when we've produced stuff, and we're an animation studio, so we always feel like, oh gosh, we should show them animation, else we're not even doing the bit that we can do. And we go so far down a route that when we present it to a commissioner, they kind of feel like, oh gosh, they've reached this point. How do we, if we don't like that bit, how do we go backwards from here? Because they've already made it. So it feels like it hasn't been collaborative. Whereas I think we're trying to like hold back a bit now and maybe go in earlier. And again, like, we certainly don't get things right every time. Like, I would say as a studio, we're very good at going, here are these funny characters, here's what makes them funny. But I think for Nickelodeon, just speaking personally, we often miss out the bit about what the heart and like how are they all integrated within their society and what makes them special as a group. So I think that's because we're just silly boys and like silliness. So we tend to do that side better. But I think, I've certainly had these conversations with you, Nina, when you can sit down and you'll go, yes, but what about this? You've missed this bit.
It's the why. Why do I care, really? Yeah.
Yeah, why do I care? And then you can take, we certainly have in the past, you take it back and you may know it in your heart. You may think it's obvious, but if the person reading it or the person speaking to you doesn't know that, then it can't get, they won't pick it up. So I think early is good. And I'd say people want to pitch Blue Zoo ideas as well, because sometimes it's useful if you're new to the industry or you are finding it hard to get a route into a broadcaster. Sometimes if you work with an animation company and they can help you shape your idea to a stage where it's suitable to go to a broadcaster, and it will add confidence that you've got that level of support when you go to broadcast. I think that's a different way. And again, I'd say coming to us, I would come in with ideas early. I mean, we see people who have worked for years and years on something, just pages and pages, and you can't read it all. How many pitches a year do you get in?
I mean, uncountable.
Uncountable.
Luckily, and that's a good thing. I like it that way. That means, because out of every billion, you'll find one or two. So that's good.
Yeah. So definitely coming early. Going slightly the other way for a second, if you want to work like within an organization like Nickelodeon, which is a slightly different route to content making, you can end up content making. What are the steps? Is there, in animation we would have like a runner, and then they'd move up to a junior. What are the ways you could come and engage with Nickelodeon if you didn't have a show idea?
So I think one of the things to think about is Nickelodeon internationally. This is not domestically. Domestically in the US is very different, but for the international landscape. We are a studio without walls. So what that basically means is we do not have a studio. We have a small central nucleus of people who run on my team, the live action, the animation, and the preschool. And as ideas come in, we then go find the Blue Zoos of the world, and so on and so forth, everywhere around the world to find the right place to produce that piece of content, because not every studio is the right match across animation and or live action for the idea. So our group is actually very small, and the bigger group, and if you really, sort of want to source yourself and find yourself on the production front line, would be to work more closely with the Blue Zoos of the world or the Blooming Media in Amsterdam, Jellyfish. There's a lot of them, and you have to sort of look around and see what you're trying to do and what you want to learn and what studio matches up to that. Because for us, we're really just the we're the sort of ambassadors of this content in a way, and a bunch of executives with a few letters around our name trying to make it happen.
But you can. I've seen people successfully, on that side, not producing content until they move up. So you've had people move through Nickelodeon. What would the sort of opening job be?
In terms of our team, I see what you're saying. So in terms of our team, it's small, but it's quite fruitful in terms of, I've been running it now. There was nothing there before I got there, so I had to build it, which was fun because you get to do what you want to do, which is nice. And I was always, my first job was with a guy named Jim Henson, who was the creator of the Muppets. And I was his development person for, 8 years. And, I learned everything you need to learn. I was very lucky to be taught by one of the best. And one of the things that I learned there was this notion of, hire great, young, hungry, bright minds and water them and let them, walk up the chain of what they want to do. And so when I was in the fortunate position of being able to set up a division based in the UK, I was able to channel that notion. And so I've had, I think of the past 6 assistants or 5 assistants I've had over the years, all of them are now up and all the way up the food chain to vice presidents and above, and in lots of different areas. So certainly you could come in as an assistant, then the next step would be a coordinator, then the next step would be a manager, then the next step would be a director, and the next step would be a vice president, and so on and so forth. So those are big, blah, blah, blah titles in a very US corporate tall building, but they don't, I think, that's what they say on the letterhead, but they are much more bouncy jobs, and the way we structure it, because we're a small group, means your hands are across everything. So I
didn't know whether when you got given the vice president title, whether I had to salute or not.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all still. I want to change my title to chief bottle washer, but I've not been allowed. So there you go.
Really good question, which I wish I thought of. Linear storylines and story arcs versus one-off episode story arcs. Have you got any room for linear?
So is this daily versus closed-ended?
Yeah.
So we do a lot of both. In fact, so obviously we've built the business on closed-ended stories, and that's what you guys all know. You know it through the multicam sitcoms on live action, whether it's Drake and Josh or Zoe or iCarly and so on and so forth. And the same with animation. Those are all closed-ended stories. In the case of animation, it's somewhat of a business decision because it's quite difficult to produce a serial that is an open-ended stories and then have it roll out across 177 channels, because it always has to air in that order, which isn't necessarily how it's produced. And very often it's difficult to repeat it. So it's quite an expensive venture to do it that way. But on live action, Nick International was the first to take up on the very, very wonderful trend in Latin America of telenovelas, and we produced a show called House of Anubis, and we produced 3 seasons of that, which was a serialized episode of a live action show shot in the UK. So yes, we do. The challenge, and it's a business challenge from a serialized live action perspective, and we still do them. We're in production right now, one called Hunter Street. We're in season 4 on it. So we don't do a ton of them, but we do them. The challenge is usually they are focused around some sort of mystery, some sort of it's in the leg of the chair, even though there's funny to it. And so once you've seen it once, you've seen it and you don't re-air it. Whereas in an iCarly episode, a classic iCarly episode, you'll binge watch 18 times. And so from a production and a business model perspective, it's best for us to have stuff that repeats and repeats and repeats and is evergreen, as I said. And the dailies are difficult to do. So in order to do the daily successfully, we look for production models that are cost effective. We look for production locations and partners that are cost effective. So Holland is one of them. Israel is one of them. The Latin American countries are also really agile at doing this. And so we do them, but we do them with caveats.
Okay. There's a lot of love for House of Anubis just going up the group chat, I think.
Yeah.
That really was a moment in time, I think.
It was a moment in time.
Yeah,
it was a great thing. And I think that filter of People magazine version of the UK, which is what that really was great. Although that was a really interesting story because it started with our Dutch team. They made a local Dutch version. They then made a local German version. And then we took it and upcycled all the scripts and made an Anglo version. So again, it's that notion that you want to make something once and use it everywhere, and you might have to tailor it a bit, but you can do it.
Brilliant. Questions come up from Claire about unsolicited pitches, or do they have to come via companies as opposed to individuals? Is there?
They can come.
I guess if they. Sorry, I was going to say if they come through the Shorts program, that's fine because they sign up to that.
They can come in any way. They can come in by carrier pigeon or napkins or whatever it may be, but they need to come through. And maybe we should put up that slide now that has where you send your pitches to.
Yes, good idea.
So that everyone has a minute to copy down what you need to do and where you need to send stuff. And this is where you can send your pitches. And this is a deliberate place for us because one of the things when I came 16 years ago to start the division, I heard the most of all was that it was almost impossible to penetrate the US. It was impossible to get in, if you will, to get your ideas across the transom. And so we really wanted to open up the world outside of the US to people to not have that issue. So, this is the place where you can send stuff and, reviews will happen. There's a whole bunch of people that review this in lots of different ways. But it is a great go-to for you to send ideas, whatever they may be. As long as you've done your homework.
Once they've sent them here, I mean, and I'm, not trying to cast aspersions. Like a lot of people would say, oh, I never hear back from people. And I know from someone who has to feed back to people that when you've got 500 things, it's very hard. Should you send it in and then expect to hear something, or should you send it in, expect not to hear anything, and be pleased if you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really something that it's a very good question, and I think in a perfect world, it would be great if all of us could reply to every single piece of content sent in. It really would be great, and I think I wish we all could. I think though the reality is if it's an amazing idea that suits what we're looking for and we're not already doing something like that or whatever it may be, you will hear from us. If you don't hear from us, I think it's safe to assume that it just wasn't a match. And, I think there's no ill will intended, but I think for us to try to get back to far more than 500 pitches, then is hard. And I think I just saw a question pop up about animation versus live action, which is a really good question because in fact, we don't have one for live action, but you should feel free to send your live action pitches to the same email.
Nina, when I said 500, that's just how many I sent you last week.
That's right.
That's just me. So there's going to be a few more.
Exactly. So.
Have any successful shorts come from scripts only? Okay, so when people submit their ideas, if it's just a script, will it be considered? Just get considered in the same way as if they got visuals?
Yeah, and then we just decide what's the best next step. Do we take the script and do we greenlight it? Do we take the script and produce a test piece of animation? Or live action? Do we take the script and produce a proper short? Do we take the script and do an animatic? And all those questions. Do we take the script and rewrite it because it's not what it needs to be? So all those questions would happen as a result of the idea itself.
And I certainly think, I guess coming from like a visual background, I can always visualize something, and I always think, well, I can make something look good, but I'm terrible at reading scripts. If I find one that hooks me in and I laugh out loud all the way through it, that's when I really think, oh, this is something special, as opposed to like someone sends in a really wow image. I'm like, wow, they've done an image, but what does that mean in reality to a series? So I think that if you're great at scripting and you can get something, it's laugh out loud funny on paper, then I think that's a really strong way to go. That's
definitely true. And I think this goes back to that Swiss cheese principle, because not everybody has a great storytelling ability, but they do have a great visual style, or they can tell a great story, but they can't draw a piece of art. And that's not only individuals, but that's also certain countries. Some countries are incredible at the visuals, but just don't have a history and how to tell a story and so on and so forth. So I think if you bring us a nugget, and we feel we can work with it, that's when we come into play as the super machine and start to match you up with a studio or match you up with a writer so that you guys can get this thing out of first gear in the way it needs to be. So that's the early intervention benefit. And, you know, as I said, think of us as a partner, not as a boss, because we're not the commissioner that you think, okay, I'm going to make this absolutely perfect and I'm going to bring it in and present it. Because in fact, as Oli said, it's too far baked often at that point for us to help.
And I think Ant coming to work with Blue Zoo on Pony is an example of that. Now, I'm not saying he had no experience and he'd just written an idea, because he'd run his own animation studio, but it was more art house with, you know, 5 or 6 animators. And so to produce a long running series where you need 60 people and a big team behind you, it made sense for him and for you guys to pair him up with someone. So
make the match.
Yeah, so I've seen like first-hand examples of that working. Do you do internships, Nickelodeon, or?
We do internships at Nickelodeon. I think we'd probably have to follow up on that internally on it, because I don't know exactly what the process is for it. And in fact, with COVID, I really don't know what the process is now. So, you know, that's to be figured out. But there are internships across all of ICOM CBS. So obviously there's Nick, but there's also MTV and Comedy Paramount. But also, obviously, you should follow up on the Blue Zoos of the world as well, because some of these production companies have amazing, again, because we're not a studio, you'll get a lot more hands-on experience in the production world when you're working with those studios that are real studios than not as well. But we do internships. So we have an enormous mentorship program internally. Again, I don't know what that's going to look like as time marches on either, but we're very committed to that, you know, that kind of care and feeding.
Yeah, I'd agree with Nina there. And if you wanted to come and work with Blue Zoo, I think, you know, you're very welcome to send in your ideas. We try and look at anything. We have a system. It's called the Matrix, which is a bit weird, but it's called the Matrix, where we kind of very quickly get an idea in and try and work out how much a group of us like it. And if it scores a certain percentage, then we will go ahead with it. If it scores a lower percentage, we might ask you to work on it some more. And we try and advise people. Again, we can't reply to everyone, but we do at least try and run everyone's thing through this matrix. I would also say the same rules apply as Nickelodeon. Look what we do. Go and look at our the shows we enjoy making. I'd like to say we make a lot of varied shows, but if you look at the shows we're making, I'd say they tend to be comedy and comedy action. We don't tend to do sort of princess animations and things like that at Blue Zoo. We're just not big into princesses. I guess we were inspired to set up the studio from the sort of early 2000s sort of Cartoon Network style stuff and the early Nickelodeon stuff. So that's where we come from as a background for the things we like and we like to make. So do research on the companies every company you pitch to. They'll welcome you much more if you talk with sort of knowledge about what they do. Submitting ideas, is there an email address? If you email info@Blue Zoo, but make it really clear in the title line that it's for developments, that will get sent over to, our team's pretty small, so that'll get sent over to 3 of us, and we'll look at it from there. So I'm trying to read questions from you and keep talking at the same time. So would Angry Beaver, this is a good question, would Angry Beavers get commissioned today in the same form?
I'm not sure I understand that.
I think what they're saying is Angry Beavers, there's like I guess in some of the earlier stuff, there's kind of slightly more violence and slightly more tension and that you don't see as much today. I mean, I always use Ren and Stimpy. Like, I love Ren and Stimpy. It's like, could you commission a Ren and Stimpy? And I think their question's one level like below that, like Ren and Stimpy.
I mean, I think the question is not, would we commission a show that had the same amount of sort of, you know, aggression or whatever the edginess is of, you know, Ren and Stimpy and so on. The question is it a great idea? Is it going to appeal to the DNA of the channel? Is it something that we feel like has 52 stories that we can really tell? Is it character driven? Will it work in 177 countries? Is it going to appeal to boys and to girls equally? When as we go through our list of things that we've talked about today, and will it fit as a, with a lead in of Casa Grandes, for example, is it diverse? Does it represent diversity on screen and behind the camera? All those questions will come into place. If those are all box ticked yes, then it's a yes. I think it's not so much about that one show today or not today. And the only other piece that we would then make sure was layered into all of this, as I said earlier, is the research and the consumer insights piece. So when Nickelodeon first was born, it was built on this principle of no parents allowed. That was like part of its sex appeal in a way, and kids would come because they thought they were watching something a little bit naughty, and that parents, go away. It was just us. And what's happened when you fast forward till today is a complete shift in how kids and parents function, and that's all due to the research and the consumer insights that we've been tracking along the way, which has flipped totally into your parents are your best friends. And kids have a tremendous amount of say in the family, in the household. Parents look to the approval of the kids versus the other way around. So therefore, our content had to change from depicting parents as kind of bumbling, annoying, in your way type of characters to people that you want to hang out with. They were funny, they were quirky, they were cool, they were your best friends when you needed them to be, and so on and so forth. So I think the research piece is also part of how we would vet a show like Angry Beavers. Do kids want to see something like that now, or do they not? So it's not so much what I would
forced my children to watch all the stuff I liked when I was young, and then I actually some of it I genuinely realized how inappropriate it is. But,
yes, that's true. There's a few Tom and Jerry episodes that are really doozies.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've got about a minute left, I think, and I'm not sure if I'm meant to thank you or someone else will, but I am going to thank you. I'm going to thank you on behalf of all these people. I'm sorry to anyone who I didn't get a chance to ask these questions. Nickelodeon are one of the friendliest and most open organizations, so do ask them questions, do send them things. They will try and get back to you. And the same with me. If you want to send Blue Zoo questions, we will try and get back to you. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Nina.
I just want to thank all of you guys too, because I know it's hot and it's weird to do it like this, and there's crazy things happening all around us. So it's just nice to spend a minute, and always nice to spend a minute with Oli. And I will say the same thing back to him. It's a mutual. This is a marriage, Oli and I. So any friend of his is a friend of ours. So